Quite a lot of people have been cancelled in 2025, and my guest today has spoken to many of them. Clare Stephens is a writer and podcast host, and she spent years exploring what happens when public opinion turns cruel and what it takes to recover when the internet decides you're the villain. This year, alongside her debut novel, The Worst Thing I've Ever Done, Clare launched The Pile-On, a podcast that gives a voice to people who've been cancelled and asks what that experience reveals about the rest of us. Today on the Stellar podcast, Clare joins me to discuss the various celebrities who were quote-unquote cancelled this year, from Katy Perry to Blake Lively, unpack the psychology behind outrage culture, the double standards women face, and the fine line between accountability and cruelty. Because, as Clare says, there's no handbook for being publicly hated, but there are lessons in how we listen, how we forgive, and how we move forward. Clare Stephens, welcome to the Stellar podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to have you here. You have had a very, very big year, so it felt appropriate to bring you on for one of our final episodes of 2025 to look back at what's happened in the culture globally and locally. No big topic here, Clare, but also in your own life. This year you released your debut novel, The Worst Thing I've Ever Done, which I absolutely loved. Anyone that hasn't read it, one of the absolute best books of the year.
Oh, thank you.
About a woman who edits a website and becomes the target of pile-on culture. And then after that, in the latter half of this year, you released a podcast called The Pile-On, which, as the name would suggest, really explores pile-on culture, and you speak to a high-profile guest each week who has experienced being quote-unquote cancelled. So lots to unpack with you today, and thank you for your time. Before we start talking about some of the people who've been cancelled this year, I'd love to ask you, Clare, what is it that drew you to explore this work, both in the novel and then again in your podcast?
I think it was a few things. Before I started working in media, I studied psychology, so I did my honours in psychology. I was doing my master's in research before I then started writing on the internet, went into media. And so I think the seed of the psychology or emotional reality of anything has always been fascinating to me. And so working in media, I then, by virtue of being in the industry, would find that these stories where somebody is being attacked online, is on the front page of the paper, is the subject of just absolute cruelty and dehumanization, it might be that I have only a few degrees of separation from them, or I've met them at an event, or I got to know them by interviewing them, or whatever it is. And I would think, oh, wow, that person is just a flawed, vulnerable human being, and that is being completely erased on the internet. So I think I've been really, really interested in how the medium of social media is responsible for then how we talk about people. That there's no room for nuance or actually having productive conversations about really, really, really complex issues. We just have to turn people into avatars and then prosecute them. So I have been interested in that for a really long time, and I feel like it was just ramping up in sort of the last few years. And there are a few times where I was like, I'd be so angry watching something happen, and then I'd think there's a book in this, and there was a book in it.
From that perspective, particularly in terms of looking at it through a psychological lens, do you think that it's worse now than it's ever been? Is it better in some ways? I know that sounds counterintuitive, but because of work of people like yourself, we are starting to look at this with a little bit of critical evaluation, as in we do hear people say, I'm so fed up with cancel culture until the next pile-on happens. Or is it a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B?
I agree that this kind of mob mentality, public shaming, has existed for as long as humans have. Whether we were in small communities, and the way that we worked out what was right and wrong, good or bad, was that we pointed at people who didn't fit, and we excommunicated them. And it's interesting because I think that the emotional experience of that is a kind of social death. And if you look at our evolutionary history, it did mean death. If you were excommunicated from your community, you didn't have a way to survive. So I think there is actually a very innate experience that comes with that. But what's different now is the scale. So when we used to do this, the maximum amount of people who could be involved in public shaming, there was a limit on it because we didn't have a global community. And now what is really terrifying is the scale. So you look at some of these huge stories of public shaming and the fact that it goes international and there's absolutely no limit. So I think culturally we are, there's a Bo Burnham song that talks about the backlash to the backlash. And I think there is that people are starting to observe when it happens. But then sometimes the bloody irony is that people will observe a pile-on happening and then respond to that pile-on by piling on the person who is doing it. And then you're all swearing at each other and calling each other names. And it's like, no, the whole point of this is to erase contempt from the conversation, not to just change the direction of it. So I think that there's a little bit more awareness, but the scale is going to keep increasing the more time we spend on social media. Like, we're spending more time now on our phones than we ever have. And because of that, there's more content, more opinions, more engagement, and that is not going anywhere.
Going back to the novel, The Worst Thing I've Ever Done, as I say, it's set in a women's website and obviously draws on some of your own experience. It really resonated with me. And part of it, Claire, that I thought was really fascinating was how the characters then start to self-censor, which is definitely something that's happening in the culture. What have your observations been? Do you think, especially you've worked in women's media, young women in particular who are very, because we'll speak to this again in a moment, women do tend to be judged a bit more harshly. Who would have ever thought it? Do you think that that's another risk of what's happening? It is actually affecting everyone in the culture simply because we're getting a little less of, or more of a sanitised version of content getting out there.
Yeah, I've heard it said that a lot of us, what social media is doing, and you're completely right about like commissioning opinion pieces and the responses that you get and then how that informs the next thing you'll commission or not commission, because the fact is sometimes you just don't have the resources to deal with what might come back. So I've heard it said that a lot of us looking at, if you were just scrolling through social media at any time about any of the many hot button issues that are surrounding us, you feel out of touch with reality because all you're getting is the extremes. And so you think, I must be the only one who maybe is uncertain about this issue or can see a little bit of this side and a little bit of this side, or can, I kind of understand what this person was saying or whatever. And what's really scary is all of us start thinking, I'm the only one who kind of is, feels like maybe I'm not represented here. But that's the nature of algorithms, that they favour the most extreme views, which then get the most extreme engagement, and that's then what's shown to us. And in terms of opinion writing, I've found people, because our attention spans are eroding, I think that a lot of the backlash that is experienced by people who have written opinions is not because of what they've said in the opinion. It's the headline, or it's, a conversation that then happened under the opinion with people who didn't even read it. It's like we don't even have the time to properly dedicate any of our energy to finding out what the argument is, or for even sitting with some discomfort that somebody is allowed to have an opinion that differs from ours, and it doesn't actually mean that they're a monster. And I often think that, I go to my family Christmas and you've got an uncle who's really conservative and you still love him. You still love him and you know that he's a great father and he's a great person and he's endlessly supportive, even if he's ideologically not aligned with me. That doesn't mean I erase him from my life. And online, increasingly, it seems as though the rhetoric is, if you are not completely aligned with somebody, it means that they should shut up, disappear, and that they are not worthy of compassion.
Where did we lose that humanity? And, not to make you the spokesperson for solving the world's problems, but I think with the work you've done, you're better positioned than most of us, Claire. How do we improve this? Because people do feel a bit icky about this lack of tolerance and this total hostility, but no one seems to know how to actually put an end to it.
I think acknowledging that it is the platform that's doing it, that if you are sitting, I have it all the time where I'm getting dinner with a friend tonight who could not be more politically different from me. And she is one of my favourite people in the whole world. And when you sit opposite somebody and you can see that at their core they are good and they have incredible qualities, you're able to then sit with that. And also, I believe it makes my resolution or my argument stronger, engaging with somebody who's actually going to challenge them. If there are things that I am so steadfast about and I will always be steadfast about, and I find that engaging in respectful debate actually makes me really strengthen those values rather than just wanting to yell at that person that they're not allowed to hold their view. And it's just interesting kind of what we'll hold space for and what we won't. And there definitely is this culture where you look at certain people and think that they, because of maybe something they've done or an opinion they hold, or, I find something like faith interesting, that sometimes we look at a religious person and want to use that as a stick to beat them with. And I'm like, a big part of democracy is religious freedom. And obviously there are lots of intricate parts of that, in that religious freedom can impose on other people's freedoms. And I agree that that's an important conversation to have. But somebody being religious in and of itself is not something that we should be mocking or shaming. I find it odd that we've gotten to that point.
We're definitely in a time where that intolerance is spilling over, where people are in very clear categories. Oh, you live in this part of the world, that's what you are. You work for that company, that's what you are. You once had dinner or were photographed at an event with that person. I know everything there is to know about you. Case closed, thank you, verdict's in. So it's so true. And also, not only are we losing that, as you say, that capacity to test your own ideas? Because what better way? I mean, isn't that what we all learn at school, is to argue your point? We're all assigned in debates, whether we believe it or not, because that if you can prosecute your case, then it's probably a pretty airtight belief. But I also think, Claire, when people get, and I include myself in this, is you get shocked by events. Something might happen, someone might get elected. And I'm not even honestly referring to any one particular person or country there. There are just outcomes where things will happen and people will go, I just never thought that was going to happen. And it's because we're not prepared, because we've been living in our own algorithms and our own echo chambers. So if nothing else, out of self-interest, it's probably better that we become a bit more familiar with the breadth and diversity of views out there, so that we don't feel shocked all the time that there's people out in the culture that don't just share the same views as the people that we deem fit to engage with.
And also that we remember hopefully the point of arguing is persuasion. It's not shaming. That there are so many, huge political issues coming to a head at the moment that I think this shouldn't be about painting people as good guys and bad guys. This should be about persuasion and consensus building and mapping a path forward, because a lot of the people who are doing the shouting and the shaming don't have solutions. And if you want to be pragmatic about living in the world together, then I think persuasion is crucial, and we've kind of lost that as a priority.
One of the really fantastic aspects of The Worst Thing I've Ever Done, your debut novel, is the level of self-reflection in there. When I'm talking about this book, how much I loved it, it's not like I'm going, I agreed with everything in it and I think it's fantastic, because as referencing our earlier conversation, that's not the point. The character, the protagonist of this book, no one is harder on her than herself. And she's got people that are very, 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 very hard on her in the most public of ways. Claire, I think that is such an underrated and arguably lost art, is to be self-reflective. I'd love to draw you a little bit on, without self-flagellation, how you have navigated that self-reflection, and how you would love to see that, if you would, presumably, something that all of us are embracing a little bit more.
Yeah, I think your point that in the book that character is harder on herself than anyone else is, I find that interesting, because when you look at female public figures, I think there's something, and I wonder if you feel this too, that there's something about, if you are very opinionated or if you put yourself out there, there's this idea sometimes that you're doing it because you're impenetrable, because you have unshakable self-confidence. And what's fascinating is that a lot of people who work in media, who do creative jobs, often are doing it because it comes from like a wound. You're a little bit like, guilty. I need external validation because that's what my self-esteem relies on. And so it's a little bit funny that you do that. And it's like, if there's one way to have some people not like you, it's to do that. And that's my greatest fear. And when I look back on my career, I'm exactly the same. I think about opinions I had, things I wrote that I completely disagree with now, wish I didn't do. But at the same time, I think being able to acknowledge that and have some grace for myself, and also that kind of self-awareness to say like, I'm imperfect and I'm figuring it out, and the nature of my work is that I figure it out on the internet where people are reading it. You know, every now and then I'd have a day at work where I might publish something or make a mistake or whatever, and I thought, oh gosh, a lot of people get to go to work and make a mistake, and the whole internet doesn't know about it. And because of what I've chosen to do, everyone knows about it, and there's malice being read into that mistake and that's what I've learnt doing these interviews as well. Like, when malice can be read, it's mostly just people being idiots. Like it's far more likely that it's a mistake than somebody being somehow really manipulative and strategic. People are just not that. We're pretty lazy creatures. So I do look back and think that there's a lot I wish I had done differently. And I am very aware that the reason I do this is because I want to connect with people, and I want, like, maybe deep down I don't feel seen. So I like, when you write an opinion, you want to feel seen. You want, even if people disagree with you, there is this craving to be heard in a way. And I do find it sad that women, because of our socialization, probably have a lot more of that deep-seated insecurity and that really prominent self-criticism, and we are the ones who are then criticised far harder in public. And you feel like saying, when somebody really viciously goes after a woman, you feel like saying, whatever you're throwing at her, she already thinks it. If you're going to make fun of her appearance, she said it to herself. If you're going to make fun of her not being intelligent or, you know, the work that she does or whatever, believe me, she's confronted all of that. And it's as though we think these people are unshakable, confident people who have no self-doubt, and every single woman on the planet does.
And when we look at the celebrities who've been cancelled this year, so far, I mean, the internet moves quickly. By the time this episode goes to air, there could be many more. But there does seem to me to be a disproportionate number of women among them. If we look at the celebrity roll call, a few of them would be Sydney Sweeney, for instance. I think she's, had her boobs out a bit too much, according to some people, especially when she's talking about quote-unquote serious issues. Can't do one, you see. Either got to be hot or smart. Couldn't be both. Obviously, she's, had herself tangled up in a few different things, an ad campaign that went possibly horribly wrong, maybe ousted as a Republican voter. Would refer to your earlier conversation about what the values that we and the judgments we assign to people who may or may not vote a certain way. Katy Perry, I'm having even research is still a little unclear what the old Katy did to get cancelled. I think
Went to space.
Yeah.
And that was, we really liked to mock that and everything that she did in space. Whereas I'm like, shouldn't we be mad at Bezos? I don't know.
I know. It seemed a bit weird that the female quote-unquote astronauts were the ones
they
getting
got the brunt.
all the heat.
Yeah.
I mean, who among us hasn't gone to space and then thought better of it later? I'm going to cancel that little trip to outer space that I had planned over the summer break because, But Katy Perry seems to have bounced back, though. As we're speaking, she has taken up with former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Seem a lovely couple. So good on Katy. We've seen a good example of the bounce-back culture. Kristen Bell and Dax Shepard, which I think is an interesting one in terms of responding to one. And then I think one of my sort of Roman empires is Blake Lively. So, Claire, let me ask you about some of the names that have stood out for you. And from some of the celebs that I've called out there, do you see a little bit of a pattern?
Yeah, I recently wrote a piece about the Kristen Bell story because I found that to be a really good example of, she wrote a caption for her anniversary, which was a bit tone deaf, had some language about like, haha, my husband has wanted to kill me, but he hasn't, like that kind of thing. And as somebody who, like most people reading it, is swimming in a world where we know that domestic violence is this sickening epidemic and we feel so powerless to stop it, I did have a visceral reaction to that and thought, oh, that's a weird joke to make to millions of people. And you get flashes of stories that have stuck with you and you just think, oh, out of all the things, I don't know if that's the thing to joke about. And to this day, weeks and weeks later, she hasn't deleted that post and she hasn't acknowledged it. And that has spiraled and spiraled and spiraled. And as always seems to happen with these stories, people then dig up old interviews and they dig up every tiny little clip of her and her husband, Dax Shepard. And there are many competing narratives. One is that she is currently being abused by her partner. Another is that she is just always oblivious to how other people feel. She's just a bitch, basically. And that she doesn't care how this landed with people. And as I watched it play out, I thought the more absurd the pile-on becomes, the more I do understand why she hasn't deleted it and she's not responding, because it becomes a question of, what am I responding to? Am I responding to claims that my husband's beating me up? Because I'm not going to entertain that. Am I responding to allegations that I'm some psychopathic monster? Like, I think if it had stayed as just, hey, this is not a great joke, one, it passes, that post is now buried in the depths of the internet. I think there are probably bigger fish to fry when it comes to the issue of domestic violence, and I think often it becomes a distraction. And you think in terms of tackling this huge issue that is affecting a lot of women, I don't think that hanging Kristen Bell out to dry is actually going to do anything. Whereas you have a president who has publicly said that he thinks domestic violence is a lesser crime, and he's argued for not including it in crime statistics. That's the president of the United States. And yet the obsession is with Kristen Bell. So I think it is this really odd thing where we want a symbol of the issue to persecute and we want to turn Kristen Bell into that symbol. And the irony of wanting to turn a woman into a symbol of men's violence against women is odd. It was also, it just ends up being laughable that in the coverage of that there was one headline that was like, Kristen Bell torched over what she did on Instagram. And I'm like, so we're literally using the language of violence to talk about somebody. Like, so I understand why she gets to the point where she thinks, this is ridiculous. People are now responding incredibly cruelly to me. So why am I going to, like, what am I actually apologizing for? What am I engaging with? And I look at somebody like Blake Lively, the other one is Meghan Markle. And I, like, as much as we've grown up in an era where celebrity has been this thing where we imagine these people are not real people. They're not actual human beings. They're plastic, essentially. They are real people who have to get up every day and somehow confront the fact that the whole world hates them. And I don't know how you do that. And Meghan Markle, the amount that has been written about her and how evil she is and she's not nice to staff and she manipulated Harry. And meanwhile, you've got Prince Andrew. And the vitriol and the language and the dehumanisation that seems to be levelled towards Meghan Markle is disproportionate to that against Prince Andrew. And I think that there needs to be a reckoning about that.
I couldn't agree more. And I also want to acknowledge that there will be people that will listen and say, no, I really don't like Meghan Markle and it's for blah, blah, blah. And I really don't like Blake Lively and it's because of blah, blah, blah. And I think, at the risk of talking about like a trio or trinity, I often think Amber Heard is sometimes the third one. The reason I would call out those three women is because there's been a lot of evidence that has not been factually disputed, that not only have there been pile-ons there, but they've actually been extremely well orchestrated smear campaigns. And so people think, I really just don't like her because, and I know it sounds patronising, but it's actually because they've only been exposed to one narrative. And so then that's the hardest thing, isn't it, is actually arguing with yourself.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, no, I'm different to everyone else that doesn't like Meghan. I don't like her for these reasons. Actually, they're the exact same reasons everyone else thinks. So that particular orchestrated campaign, Claire, any idea how we combat that? Because, as I say, a little bit like the good witch said to Dorothy, sort of, you had the answer all along. All of us could be looking at why we hate people with a more critical lens. How do we get there?
I think it is looking at whether we have turned a human being into a symbol of something. Because there is a difference between, we all know, we know it when we have kids, when we go to school, that there is a difference between talking about someone's behaviour and talking about them as a person. And if you want to change someone's behaviour, you talk about the behaviour. You don't shame them. Shame is not a motivator for behaviour to change. And if you look at, Meghan Markle, maybe you do think that there's something interesting in, does she want fame? Doesn't she want fame? Or has she been honest about things or whatever? It's so hard to tell what the truth is with any of this. But maybe you do have some of those thoughts. Does that mean that she is deserving of the scale of vitriol, of the complete dehumanisation? There's an Australian researcher who writes about what we do online is we don't give people the dignity of slow, considered understanding, and it's essentially prejudice. And so I guess the interesting thing is we're really putting other people's behaviour under a microscope and not able to turn that microscope back to us and think, wait, am I actually just being judgmental and just being prejudiced and just seeing a snapshot of all these little things and turning it into a huge judgment? And why do I need, if I want to talk about a moral issue or a value that I hold, why do I need to do that via Meghan Markle? If I believe that, dishonesty is bad, maybe that's just something that I can believe. I don't need to destroy Meghan Markle in order to demonstrate that. So, I mean, but I think the fact is and I know what you mean. It sounds patronizing to say it, but it's brainwashing. Like, you go on TikTok, I am terrified. There are so many conspiracy theories about why TikTok was designed, what it's doing to us. It's when you are in one corner of the algorithm, it is brainwashing that you couldn't even kind of have a dissenting opinion if you wanted to, because you are just swimming in a certain narrative. And I think what's hard is that probably the answer to all of this is to get off it. But these social media platforms are so clever at keeping us on.
That's exactly right. And it's so true with the brainwashing. I interviewed Jennifer Robinson, the human rights lawyer, for an event earlier this year, and she had represented Amber Heard. And again, I know that word is triggering. I very rarely meet anyone that doesn't have a visceral reaction to Amber Heard's name. And that's the experience that Jennifer Robinson has too. So she successfully represented Amber Heard in a trial with Johnny Depp against. And in fact, Johnny Depp, was found guilty of
and I don't think, I think
violence.
if you asked the average person walking down the street, I don't think they'd know that. And that's what's interesting about the Blake Lively case, is that I think even if she wins in a court of law, I don't know if it matters.
That's exactly right. And Jennifer Robinson said when she meets people, they say, oh, I really don't like Amber. And she says, why? She genuinely wants to know, what is it that she has said? What is it that she has done? And they cannot ever point to it. And again, I know that sounds really broad strokes, but it is true. And you and I are both giving grace to everyone and ourselves. It's not like you have to like these people. As you say, Meghan Markle, there would be many reasons that people would think, oh, this or that, fine. But why do you then have to go and spend time and energy taking that person down or contributing to a wider culture of hate and venom? Can't we all just sort of shrug and get on with our lives?
And I always find it fascinating with my podcast, The Pylon. I'll have a guest on and they can share, this thing happened. I was, the center of national news headlines. I got thousands of messages calling me a psychopath. I got, I lost my job. I went through all of this. I ended up in a mental health ward. And the comments below it will be, yeah, but you did X, Y, and Z. And it's and I feel like responding, they know, like they've heard you. And with Meghan Markle or Amber Heard, I often think if you're going to comment something, it's already been said. But the volume and the scale is what makes a situation like that so much worse. That, and there are several examples of people whose, mental health plunges to really terrifying depths, people who have taken their lives, and it is, a lot of the analysis around it is that it is this idea of scale and total excommunication, and the fact that they are perceiving that they are not seen as human by other people. And if they are not seen as human, then what's the point in being here? And there's no way to redeem themselves. So I do find it odd that people want to keep perpetuating criticism that's out there, and you think, at what point has the point been made? The criticism's been said, and we have some grace. Because in real life, you hopefully forgive people. Like, all of us have had experiences where we've made a mistake or someone that we love has made a mistake. And the only way for human relationships to continue is that you accept you did the wrong thing, or, even accept that person isn't going to accept that they did the wrong thing, and you decide how to move on. But you can't just bring it up every 5 minutes. It's just not how interacting with other people works.
100%, and especially when we know that we are living in a time, and arguably always have, where people have committed very serious crimes and a lot of behaviour for whatever reason due to legal loopholes will go quote unquote unpunished, and yet people are hounded till the end of days for what self-appointed arbiters of behaviour deem unsavoury. Claire, with the pile-on and your observations, some of the people that you've had on the podcast, what would you say is the worst impact? You spoke there about, there have been people who have taken their own lives. There have been people who have completely disappeared from any source of public life, left their careers as a result of a pile-on. What are some of the darkest, I suppose, ramifications that you have experienced in your conversation speaking to people for the pile-on?
I have been surprised by the frequency of suicidal thoughts, that it seems that for some people it becomes almost a social logic. Like, if everybody hates me, then if this is the fact is, people can say, turn off your phone, walk away, touch some grass, but the internet is the heartbeat of modern life. It just is. For a lot of people, it is a crucial part of their careers, their communities. And if you're being excommunicated from that, and if that place no longer feels safe for you in that you're being threatened or abused, then we know that there are people who take their own lives, and we know that the incidence of suicidal ideation is really high. And so I've been really surprised by the amount of people who will acknowledge that and who will say, I had never experienced that before, and I didn't even know I didn't know why I was having these thoughts. And I often think about there's a story, it was quite a few years ago, but a young man called Wilson Gavin who he turned up at a drag queen story time and he was protesting against it, and he got publicly shamed. It was the days where Twitter was the big engine, and really, really piled on, and he took his own life. And there was no reckoning. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, like the people who jumped on, I wonder if they're going to have a bit of a look in the mirror and think, oh, was that worth it? Was that, is this what needed to happen? And they didn't. And a lot of the people who jumped on that are still the people who jump on, every possible pile-on that
even
that
when
they can.
Know what it may lead to.
What it can lead to. And so that really scares me, that there was sort of no learning from that. And I look at I sit opposite some people and I see this happen over and over again, and I think it'll happen again. It'll happen again. And I just don't know what we're doing, what we're trying to do. Like, is it bringing about social change? Are people seeing the world get better by calling people names on the internet? I don't think so. So is it worth the mental health cost? And I mean, some of the irony is that a lot of this stuff is done in the name of mental health, that it's like, you said this thing that impacted people's mental health. And you think, well, a general broad statement that maybe doesn't land well is very different to a targeted attack. They are two very, very different things. So yeah, and there are a lot of people say, cancel culture isn't real, cancellation isn't real, and I kind of stay away from that language for that reason, that I think it's been co-opted by different movements and it sort of doesn't say what you want it to say. But the fact is that people have lost, even if you can't see that they've lost tangible opportunities, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And the loss is to their confidence, their self-worth, their bravery. And if we're doing this disproportionately to women, and I think we do it disproportionately to women of colour and to women with disabilities and to women where we look at their identity and decide that they have to be morally pure because of an identity they didn't choose. But if we do it more to them, then the media landscape just becomes even more homogenous than it already is. So I think it's a shame that women have occupied public life for such a short period of time and we're hounding them out of it.
And I think that human impact that you speak about with some of the people that you've seen is certainly something I've observed too. And, speaking to people here on the Stellar podcast that have gone through public vilification and pile-on culture of the worst kind, and just to hear the rawness in their voice. And these are some of the lucky people because they've still stayed in the media and still stayed visible, as a lot of the guests are on the pile-on, because if they're sitting here, then they are, as I say, arguably one of the more fortunate ones, but the impact on their community and their loved ones is very profound. On a slightly more positive note then, your observations from hosting the pile-on about what is the best way to handle this situation. And I will caveat that by saying I know that there is no one. As with everything to do with this conversation, Clare, it's incredibly nuanced and complex, and there's never, a one-size-fits-all. But have you discovered or observed that there seems to be, if there is a handbook or that was something you were ever putting together, if you find yourself on the receiving end of a pile-on, what are some of the do's rather than the don'ts?
I think the one of the big things is to, especially if it's at a certain level, which is relatively small, to not engage with it, because it's an argument you can't win. And I can understand, and it's a big plot point in the book, that I can understand the human instinct to challenge something that is not true or that is unfair. And, you'll see something and just want to say, oh, no, but you've just made that up, so I'll just fix that for you, and then everything will be better. And no, it never, that whoever is kind of coming with that energy of wanting to turn you into a symbol to tear down, whatever you say is going to play into that. So for the most part, it is not the case where there is some magical combination of words that's going to make it go away. However, I do think that when it really is that somebody has done the wrong thing, done a tangible mistake, that acknowledging the mistake, apologising, and I mean there could be a huge book in the kind of anatomy of an apology and exactly what to say and what not to say, and not making excuses and all of that stuff. But I think apologising and moving on quite quickly, where I think about it especially in people who work in the creative arts or who work in media, I think letting your work speak for itself, there's a lot to be said for that. That I just know the people I admire the most persevere in spite of all of that. And ultimately, the narrative changes. So I look at somebody like Lena Dunham, who has been subject to the kind of pile-on and the kind of personal, cruel criticism that could have just stopped her from anything, and what that does to creativity, and risk-taking and trusting your instincts. I can't imagine what that did to her as a young woman. But I think then when she writes something, when she makes something, people are reminded that she's brilliant. So I think the people who really recover are the people who persevere anyway and have faith that their people will find them.
So there is a bit of a long game strategy sometimes. And as you say, that instinct for anyone to feel misunderstood. And this can happen in the most immediate interactions. You might be texting with someone and they completely misconstrue what you're saying. Most people are going to go, no, that's not what I meant. And a lot of this is happening at a macro scale. Lena Dunham is an example, I think, of somebody where you then see them coming out of it, the recovery or whatever the rehabilitation, however we describe this, the people that don't just disappear completely from public life or, worst case scenario, from life altogether. The people that we don't just forget about, the people that then come back.
Yeah.
She's a great example. Is there other examples that you think that you have seen it happen, and putting your crystal ball on some of the people we've spoken about in 2025, do you see some of those people coming out the other side of it? For instance, again, to bring up Blake Lively, Taylor Swift released her album later in the year. Now, she and Blake Lively, very, very good friends. There'd been a lot of conjecture that Taylor Swift had cut ties with Blake Lively. As we're speaking, there'd still be a lot of people that believe that. By the way, you're wrong, and I know I'll be vindicated one day. Maybe I won't, but I am right. But sidebar. Taylor wrote a song on her album called Cancelled, which is clearly, asterisk, unproven. It's 100% about Blake Lively. And some of her fan base is so determined to convince themselves that Taylor has severed ties with Blake Lively that they're telling them that it's about other people like Sophie Turner. Now, sure, it might be a bit broader, but it's about Blake Lively. What do you think about that, Claire? If that does come out eventually, that Taylor and Blake made a decision that with Justin Baldoni playing a very, very ugly legal game, that it was better, given that his team had tried to weaponise Taylor Swift and bring her into this, that he was the one doing that, not Blake, that they were better just to keep their distance publicly until things smooth over. If I'm proven right on that, do you think that we'll see a bit of forgiveness for Blake Lively, or do you think even Taylor Swift can't turn around the court of public opinion for that story?
I think that that's such an interesting example, because it is the confidence and the certainty with which people approach these things. They will say, like, that I know that Taylor Swift and Blake Lively are no longer friends, and that's because Blake Lively really is a monster and Taylor Swift found out, and all of, like, just, and you just think, oh God, like, yeah, it's just absurd. So I think with Blake Lively, the best thing would be to keep working, because if she is then in a movie or a TV show that we all love, we're going to forgive pretty quickly. Like, I think the thing about keeping momentum and keeping working in spite of all of this is that it's one of the benefits of our fractured attention span, is that people literally forget. And I think where it really sticks to people is where they haven't kind of replaced it with anything. And so even Taylor Swift, you look a few years back where she was absolutely, punching bag number one of being mocked and shamed, and the way she came back from that was being prolific, and the love that people have for her. And, I went and saw her when she was in Australia last year, like, to be in a stadium like that and think, she would have felt like she had this many people yelling at her not long ago. And it's by just keeping on creating and putting stuff into the world that people end up taking value from that rather than tearing down everything else. So I think with Blake Lively, I'm not even sure if the court case will have any tangible impact on her reputation, but I think it is, if her career continues and she does good work, that it will change how we see her.
Looking forward to next year, do you predict any way that this cancellation roller coaster will slow down, accelerate? Are there any people that you think, as Taylor's song says, might be flying a little too close to the sun as we round out 2025, that are going to become the targets of the mob next year? Or do you think there's anyone who's been out in the cold for a while that might be due or about to make their rehabilitation recovery from being cancelled?
I worry that the worse things get on a macro scale, the more we think in a really micro way. And the nature of media and just basically the way we consume pop culture at the moment is that we're in silos and it's so fractured that there are no, the Blake Lively generation of celebrity isn't going to exist, because what somebody else thinks of as a celebrity, I've never heard of them, and vice versa. So I think it will be this thing where there are these micro, like we start to look at things on a really, really micro level and ascribe a lot of ascribe a very, very high standard for people who have very little power and give no standard to people who have a lot of power. So I think almost the more powerless we feel to actually change anything, the more we just grab at what we can see. And the danger of that is that what we can see is not really the powerful people. I think it all the time that just because you see somebody in your Instagram feed does not mean that they're not running the world. They're not, like, even the Kristen Bell thing. I thought there's a difference between being, an actor and a politician. And you look at these billionaires who are objectively making the world a worse place, and we go for the people who are doing anything that symbolically supports the billionaires rather than the billionaires themselves. And you see it a lot where people are like, how could you possibly, work for that company or align yourself with this? And it's like, let's actually talk about the big issue and use our, the power of the people to create change. If we want to create change, like, it's going to take actual work. It's going to take actual campaigning and actual trying to persuade people rather than tearing down somebody that you see on a micro level. I will be interested to see how the social media ban, which will be in place by the time this episode goes live, I will be really interested to see if that has any... I'm really interested to see how the implementation of it goes, whether it practically works, and whether it actually, by osmosis, makes other people think about their social media use. If people are, if we're going to all this effort to not allow teens to use it because we know how bad it is, will that make us stop for a second and question our use of it? Because it is this weird thing where if you're not there, it doesn't exist. If we think this is so absurd, if we turn it off, the people doing the piling on have no power. So I wonder if there will be a bit of a kind of response to that legislation, and then a bit of a reckoning with people who are older and maybe the parents of those kids and that sort of thing.
Such a good point. I know in my own life, I'm often not online, probably nearly as much as I should be because of the nature of my job. But because of the nature of my job, I'm often not online. And so people will say, oh, did you hear about so-and-so? And I'm like, no, what? Yeah. So I am, did that tree really come down in the forest? Because I wasn't there to hear or see it. Claire, final question for you. Working on the pylon, literally the definition of a vicious cycle. Vicious in terms of the tone and the narrative, and cycle in that you're having these complex conversations with people who've experienced pile-on culture in a nuanced manner, only then for some of that content to perhaps inevitably incite a new pile-on. Tell me a little bit about the reaction to it, and has it been predictable or frustrating or a little bit of everything?
It is the basic premise that is so true of all things, in that the feedback overwhelmingly has been so positive, so encouraging. People messaging me, people messaging the guests who are on the show and saying, this was a really, really interesting, eye-opening conversation. I'm so glad you did this. It's changing the way I interact online. It's making me reconsider things I've done. I hearing the vulnerability from that person really changed how I approach, the way I speak to people. So that has been 99% of it. And then, of course, there's the 1% where it is people who might take a section out of context, or people who might see a clip on social media and get very, very angry about the idea of this person who they perceive did a really bad thing being platformed, which, again, the idea of platforming I find interesting because, I mean, yeah, we talk about like platforming politicians, and you think if someone's the leader of a country, they've got a platform. You're not giving it to them by putting them on a podcast. And I kind of think about that with these people. You've got people who have, 500,000 followers, and it's like, you platformed them. And I'm like, they've got the platform. Like, so there has been, some people thinking that those people don't deserve the right to talk about their experience. And again, I think the way to deal with it is to not engage and not respond, because I don't think it's a good faith conversation. Some people I have had some good faith conversations where people might ask about an element of the podcast or challenge something that I said or didn't say, and I will have a good faith back and forth. But I would say, and anyone who gets, there are people who say like they have a criticism and they're annoyed that they're not getting a response, and you think, I don't know what you're going to do with that response. I don't know. I think the point of you getting that response is so you can go through it with the fine-tooth comb and tear apart all my words, and that makes more content for you.
That's
so,
a sequel. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like I don't have time for that. And so there has been a little bit of that. But I heard Guy Sebastian say this thing on the Assembly. Have you seen? Oh my gosh. Guy Sebastian said this thing that I am now he's my guru, where he basically said someone commented something negative on something he posted, and he engaged with that person. And then he got a message from somebody who said, I have supported you every step of your career, and I have commented supportive stuff on everything you've ever posted, and you've never responded to me. And he was like, yeah, why am I putting my energy towards that person? So that's what I'm trying to do, is the people who are supportive, really engaging with them and thanking them, and then the people who aren't prepared to have good faith conversations, you'd never make anything if you spent your energy towards them. And also, the fact is, with the people I'm interviewing and with me, none of us think that we're perfect, and we hear criticism from everywhere. So it's not the fact that we can only take on, positive feedback. It's just the fact that you can't create anything if you have that loud criticism in your head at all times. So it has been interesting to see the cycle, and when people, you've got somebody talking about how they were, in a mental health ward, and then you've got someone commenting saying, yeah, but they said the wrong thing. And it's like, but the point is, do you think they should have had to go to a mental health ward? Like, so there's kind of no point trying to have that conversation. But I do think when I see those comments as well, I think, and that's the point. That
is the whole point. Job done. And I really resonates to what you're saying about the criticism of platforming, quote unquote, somebody, something that we certainly get a lot at the brand of Stella. And it's like, well, are we going to be bullied or thinking, oh, that person with that following might come after us, so we better just ignore you, even though we think you have a story to tell, even though we think there is something to be discussed with empathy and nuance, and also because that person's story resonates with a lot of people, but maybe people aren't as vocal on social media. I think it comes back to what's been a bit of a recurring theme. We've all got to sit in that discomfort because otherwise we're going to be in a very shrill, sanitized world where none of us are doing anything that might spark any discomfort for fear of being bullied into silence.
And I think you lose your integrity a bit as well. And I've noticed that being out on my own, that you've got social media platforms, you've got a platform like Substack. And if you were to just pursue whatever gave you the most, the most clicks, the most downloads, the most positive, positive affirmations, you'd actually lose your integrity and you wouldn't be doing what you actually thought was important work. And therefore, there has to be a way to kind of be able to take feedback, to sense the temperature and to see what is useful and a productive contribution, but also to have some sense of who you are and what you want to do and have that not be affected by the noise.
Well done on doing exactly that from what I have seen, having read, as I said, Clare Stephens' fabulous book, The Worst Thing I've Ever Done, and her podcast, The Pile On. Congratulations on both of those pieces of work. We will have a link to both of those in the show notes. Clare, thank you so much for finishing up what's been a very big year by coming and sitting with me. I mean, it's been good riddance. Prince Andrew is not even called that anymore.
I know. Oh, gosh, yes, I referred to him as that, didn't I? And I know that's anachronistic.
No, but I think that's that whole interesting conversation about accountability still happening, but maybe through channels other than just people frothing at the mouth.
Yeah.
Over
exactly.
what someone has or hasn't done. Clare, thank you again for your time and congratulations on everything you've achieved this year.
Thank you. I appreciate it.